Picture this. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, species that have mastered faster-than-light travel and can terraform entire planets, all sitting in their fancy council chambers absolutely terrified. And what has them shaking in their various appendages? Some creatures are calling void rays that just started popping up in the outer colonies. The emergency session had been going on for hours. You could feel the panic in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. The massive council chamber, usually filled with the proud chatter of 100 different species showing off their latest achievements, had fallen dead silent, except for the occasional nervous clicking from the insect-like Zephyrians or the low humming sounds of blob-shaped gelatins made when they were scared. These wraiths weren't like anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Imagine shadows that could think, move, and most importantly, kill. They phase through shields like they're not even there. They literally eat energy. And wherever they go, they leave behind this creeping darkness that just keeps spreading outward like some cosmic infection. The first reports came from mining stations on the edge of known space. Workers would send normal check-ins one day, and the next day there'd be nothing but silence in these expanding dark zones that seemed to swallow light itself. The Altarians, you know, those crystal-looking aliens who think they're so sophisticated with their perfect geometric cities and their fancy energy manipulation, they're practically shattering from fear. Their representative kept making these high-pitched, ringing sounds that their universal translators couldn't even process properly. Every time someone mentioned the wraiths, rainbow cracks would appear across his crystalline face. Even the big bad Corvin Empire, the guys who usually solve everything by shooting it with bigger and bigger guns, are talking about running away. These are the same aliens who conquered half their galaxy cluster through pure military might, who build ships the size of small moons just because they can, but their war admiral, this massive reptilian creature covered in battle scars, stood up in the chamber and actually used the word retreat. You could hear the collective gasp from species who had never imagined the Corvins backing down from anything. But here's the really scary part. 3 entire fleets went out to stop these wraiths. We're not talking about some small patrol ships or outdated defense forces. These were proper military fleets with the best ships, the most advanced weapons, crews from a dozen different species who have been fighting space battles for thousands of years. The first fleet that went out was led by the Valerian Federation, masters of plasma weaponry and shield technology. They had ships that could level entire planets and defensive systems that had never been breached in recorded history. The second fleet was even bigger. The Council pulled together forces from 7 different species, including the tech genius Nexri with their reality-bending weapons, and the warrior monks of Thesha, who could apparently fight with pure mental energy. They went in confident, broadcasting their approach, ready to show these shadow creatures what organized galactic military power looked like. And you know what happened to all of them? They just vanished. Gone. Like they never existed. No distress calls, no debris fields, no last-minute heroic transmissions. One day they were there on all the sensors. The next day there was nothing but empty space, and that creeping darkness spreading outward from where they used to be. The math guys, those super-intelligent calculant species who can predict stellar movements thousands of years in advance, they ran the numbers on a wraith expansion. Their conclusion made everyone's blood run cold. At the current rate of spread, these shadow creatures would reach the core worlds, the heart of galactic civilization, in exactly 50 cycles. 50 cycles to pack up billions of years of progress and run. And that's exactly what everyone started doing. The shipping lanes filled up with evacuation vessels, carrying entire populations away from the outer colonies. Some species started building these massive generation ships, hoping to flee to other galaxies entirely. The Wanderer Collective, nomads who had been traveling space for millennia, actually offered to teach other species how to live permanently on ships because they figured nowhere would be safe to settle again. Resource prices went completely crazy as everyone tried to stockpile supplies for the long journey to nowhere. Ancient species who had lived on the same worlds for millions of years were abandoning their homelands. The peaceful Harmony Gardens, where diplomatic meetings had been held for centuries, stood empty as even the caretaker species fled in terror. The darkness kept spreading, and with each passing day, more colony worlds went silent. The galaxy's greatest minds, its most powerful weapons, its oldest wisdom, None of it mattered against an enemy that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of reality itself. So there's all this panic, right? Ships are evacuating. Entire species are building these massive generation ships to flee to other galaxies, and the Council is basically having a collective breakdown. The emergency broadcasts were going out constantly, warning everyone to stay away from the expanding dark zones. Trade routes that had been used for thousands of years were being abandoned overnight. You had ancient shipping companies, some that had been running cargo between worlds since before most species even discovered fire, just shutting down completely and telling their crews to head for the galactic core. The really wild part was watching these incredibly advanced civilizations, species that could literally move stars around if they needed to, acting like scared children. The ethereal collective, beings made of pure thought who usually acted all mysterious and wise, were actually crying. Well, whatever passes for crying when you're a floating ball of conscious energy. The Titan builders who construct those massive space habitats that house billions started dismantling their own greatest works just to get the raw materials for escape ships. Even the black market was going crazy. Smugglers who usually dealt in exotic technologies and rare minerals were now running protection rackets, charging ridiculous amounts just to escort refugee ships through supposedly safe space. The criminal underworld was more terrified than anyone because they operated in exactly the kind of outer rim territories where the wraiths first appeared. Then, right in the middle of this galaxy-wide freakout, something completely unexpected happened. The long-range sensors picked up a single ship dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Now, when I say single ship, I mean one ship. Not a fleet, not even a small squadron. Just one lonely vessel against an enemy that had already consumed 3 entire fleets. And this wasn't some massive dreadnought that could crack planets in half, or some sleek high-tech super vessel bristling with experimental weapons. It was just this beat-up little ship that looked like it had been through hell and back. The hull was scarred with what looked like impact marks from countless battles. The paint was chipped and faded, and there were obvious repair patches welded over damaged sections. It was the kind of ship that most civilized species would have scrapped decades ago. The name on the side, barely visible through all the battle damage, read UES Defiance. Most of the council members had to check their databases just to remember what those letters even meant. UES stood for United Earthship, belonging to that new species that had just joined the galactic community a few years back. You know, humans from some backwater planet called Earth that most people had already forgotten about. See, when the distress calls first went out, the Council had contacted everyone, every member species, every allied government, even some neutral parties who might be willing to help. It was standard protocol to cast a wide net during galactic emergencies. The humans had been included in that list, but honestly, most of the aliens probably forgot they'd even sent them a message. These were newcomers who hadn't even mastered proper faster-than-light travel yet, still using these primitive jump drives instead of the smooth hyperspace tunnels that civilized species preferred. The really funny thing is, while all these advanced civilizations are losing their minds, completely falling apart with fear, the response from the human ship is almost boring in how casual it sounds. The communication comes through on standard frequencies, no fancy quantum entanglement channels or telepathic networks, just basic radio waves that even pre-spaceflight species could understand. Captain Mike Reynolds comes on the comm and just says, "Yeah, we got your message about the Wraith situation. We're heading in to take care of your problem." That's it. No dramatic declarations of heroism, no request for detailed tactical briefings, no demand for backup or support fleets. Just a guy who sounds like he's talking about fixing a leaky faucet or dealing with a pest control issue back home. The council chamber erupted in confused chatter. The Altarian representative, still cracked from fear, made those high-pitched ringing sounds that roughly translated to, "Are they insane?" The Corvin War Admiral leaned forward in his seat, probably wondering if this was some kind of elaborate suicide mission, or the humans simply didn't understand what they were up against. Some of the more experienced council members tried to contact the Defiance again to explain the situation more clearly. Maybe these primitive humans hadn't gotten the full picture. Maybe they didn't understand that entire fleets of advanced warships had been wiped out without even managing to scratch these shadow creatures. But Captain Reynolds just repeated his message with the same matter-of-fact tone, "We understand the situation, Council. We've dealt with worse back home. Don't worry about it." And with that, the small, battered human ship changed course and headed straight into the dark zone, where 3 fleets had vanished, while the entire galaxy watched in stunned silence. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Council is watching this tiny human ship head straight into the asteroid belt, where 3 fleets just got wiped out, and they're thinking these Deathworlders have finally lost it. The shadow zone, where the wraiths are strongest, is basically a no-go area now. Nothing with any sense goes in there. Every single sensor array that gets too close just goes dead, and the darkness keeps expanding like some kind of cosmic cancer. The Council members are practically glued to their viewing screens, watching what they assume is going to be the shortest rescue mission in galactic history. The Zephyrian ambassador is making those nervous clicking sounds so fast it sounds like a machine gun, while the gelatin representative has basically turned himself into a quivering blob of anxiety. Even the usually stoic Nexary tech priests are muttering prayers to their digital gods. But Captain Reynolds and his crew, they're treating this like just another day at the office. The communication feeds from the Defiance are still open, and you can actually hear the humans talking to each other in the background. It's the most casual conversation you've ever heard from people heading into what everyone else considers certain death. Someone's complaining about the coffee being too strong. Another crew member is asking if anyone remembered to record last night's sports game from Earth. And there's this ongoing argument about whether it's better to have pizza or burgers for dinner. See, what the galaxy didn't understand about humans is that we come from a planet that's been actively trying to kill us since day one. And I'm not talking about the usual stuff that most species face. A few natural disasters here and there, maybe some aggressive wildlife. Earth is what other species would classify as a class 12 Death World, a place so hostile that most galactic insurance companies won't even insure ships that go there. Think about it. Ice ages that lasted for thousands of years, supervolcanoes that could block out the sun for decades, killer storms that could level entire continents, earthquakes that could split the ground open for hundreds of miles. And that's just the planet itself. The wildlife is even worse. Humans evolved alongside creatures that literally hunted us for sport. Massive cats with teeth like swords, bears that could crush our skulls with one swipe, tiny insects that could kill us with a single bite. Most species in the galaxy evolved on nice, stable worlds where the biggest threat might be a seasonal flood or maybe some mildly aggressive herbivores. The Altarians developed on a planet where the weather was so predictable they could plan their crystalline growth cycles centuries in advance. The Corvins had to work hard just to find anything challenging enough to keep their warrior culture interested. But humans? We spent millions of years getting creative about survival because everything on our planet was bigger, stronger, faster, or more venomous than we were. We learned to outsmart saber-toothed tigers, to survive ice ages with nothing but animal skins and fire, to cross entire oceans on wooden boats just to see what was on the other side. When other species were developing art and philosophy, we were busy figuring out increasingly clever ways to not get eaten. So when a Defiance enters the Shadow Zone and those reality-bending wraiths start their attack, the human crew doesn't panic or try to run. Lieutenant Amy Foster, their tactical officer, takes one look at these energy beings that can phase through everything the galaxy's best scientists have ever built and thinks, okay, what can't they phase through? It's the kind of practical, no-nonsense thinking that you only get from a species that grew up solving life-or-death problems every single day. While the Council's greatest minds have been trying to develop exotic energy weapons or quantum disruptors, Foster goes back to basics. These things are made of energy. They can phase through energy shields and energy weapons. So what about good old-fashioned physical matter? She starts running calculations on her tablet, the kind of simple physics that most advanced species have forgotten about centuries ago. Energy beings might be able to phase through plasma and laser beams, but what about solid objects? What about chunks of metal moving at high speed? The breakthrough comes when they spot some old mining charges floating in the asteroid belt, left over from whatever operation was running here before the wraiths showed up. These charges are filled with iron particles, designed to break apart asteroids by creating clouds of metal debris. Foster realizes that if these energy beings can't phase through solid matter, then a cloud of iron particles moving at high velocity might actually hurt them. The rest of the crew doesn't need long explanations or detailed scientific briefings. Chief Engineer Tony Rodriguez just nods and says, "So we're going old school then?" Pilot Jessica Wong starts plotting courses that will let them use the asteroid field's natural cover, while Communications Officer Ryan Brooks starts rigging the mining charges for remote detonation. Within minutes, they have a plan that's so simple it's almost stupid. Use mining explosives full of metal particles to create solid barriers that the Wraiths can't phase through, then herd them into kill zones using electromagnetic pulses from the ship's engines. The Council is watching this unfold in complete disbelief. These primitive newcomers are about to try tactics that wouldn't be out of place in a pre-spaceflight civilization against an enemy that had defeated the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. The battle in the asteroid belt wasn't really a battle in the traditional sense. When most species think of space combat, they picture massive fleets exchanging energy beams across vast distances, shields flaring as they absorb hits, maybe some dramatic explosions as ships get destroyed in spectacular fashion. This was nothing like that. It was more like watching a group of extremely creative problem solvers turn an impossible situation into a manageable one. Like mechanics who had wandered into the wrong workshop and decided to fix whatever was broken. Engineer Jake Morrison started rigging mining explosives with metal shrapnel, but not in any way that would make sense to a traditional military engineer. Instead of trying to build bigger bombs, he was making smaller, more precise ones. He'd take apart the mining charges, remove about half the explosive material, and then pack the remaining space with iron filings, steel ball bearings, basically anything metallic he could find floating around in the asteroid field. "It's like making a giant shotgun shell," he explained over comm, his voice steady despite the fact that shadow creatures were literally trying to eat his ship's energy core. "We don't need to blow them up. We just need to throw enough solid stuff at them that they can't dodge at all." Navigator Beth Clark used the asteroid field itself as a weapon, creating electromagnetic corridors to funnel the Wraiths exactly where they wanted them. She was treating space like a three-dimensional puzzle, using the natural magnetic fields generated by the metal-rich asteroids to create invisible walls that the energy beings couldn't pass through. It was like watching someone play the most complex video game ever created, except the stakes were the survival of galactic civilization. The Council members watching from their safe observation posts couldn't believe what they were seeing. The humans were literally improvising their strategy as they went along, treating each Wraith encounter like a learning experience rather than a life-or-death struggle. What really got the watching aliens was how the humans treated each encounter. Instead of panicking when their first approach didn't work, they just tried something else. Communications Officer Dan Phillips actually started taking notes during the fights, treating the whole thing like a research project. You could hear him over the open channel, calmly saying things like, "Okay, that iron cloud worked on the small ones, but the big Wraith just absorbed it. Let's try copper next time, see if that makes a difference." When energy weapons proved useless, they switched to kinetic rounds, basically just firing chunks of metal really fast. When those didn't work well enough, they tried sonic disruption, using their ship's communications array to blast the Wraiths with sound waves. When that failed, they combined approaches, shooting metal projectiles while simultaneously hitting the creatures with electromagnetic pulses and sound waves. The really amazing part was listening to their conversations during all this. Most species would either be screaming in terror or maintaining rigid military discipline. The humans were just chatting like they were troubleshooting a broken appliance. Pilot Jessica Wong would say something like, "Hey, Jake, that last blast scattered the Wraith but didn't kill it. Maybe we need to adjust the frequency." And Morrison would respond, "Yeah, good catch. Let me try adding some aluminum powder to the mix. See if that changes the resonance." The crew was constantly talking to each other, sharing ideas, adapting on the fly. It was like watching a species that had been born to solve problems that shouldn't have solutions. Every setback was just new data to work with. When a Wraith managed to absorb one of their metal projectiles, they didn't retreat or call for backup. They just started experimenting with different metals to see which ones the creatures had trouble digesting. Chief Medical Officer Lisa Park even got involved, analyzing the energy patterns of destroyed Wraiths to figure out their weak points. Their energy signature drops significantly when they encounter iron, she reported, but it spikes with copper and aluminum. I think they might actually be allergic to certain molecular structures. The aliens watching this unfold were witnessing something they'd never seen before in galactic history, a species that treated an existential threat like an interesting engineering challenge. The Altarians, with their perfectly logical crystal minds, couldn't comprehend this level of flexibility. The Corvins, used to solving problems through overwhelming force, were stunned by the humans' willingness to try completely different approaches every few minutes. And slowly but surely, the shadow zone started shrinking. Each destroyed wraith made the darkness recede a little bit. The expanding death zones that had been consuming everything in their path began to contract for the first time since the crisis started. What seemed like an unstoppable cosmic plague was being beaten back by a single ship full of humans who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. The council members were taking their own notes now. Try to understand how this small crew of primitives from a backwater planet was succeeding where their greatest fleets had failed. The answer was becoming clear. Humans didn't just fight problems. They adapted to them, learned from them, and turned them into opportunities to get creative. The final transmission from the Defiance came about 6 hours after they'd entered the dead zone. Captain Reynolds' voice crackled through the council chambers, and you could hear the smile in his words even across the static-filled communication channel. Wraith population eliminated. Kepler Station is secure and operational. You might want to run more regular patrols out here. Looks like these things have been building up in the gaps between your territories for decades. The silence in the council chamber was deafening. Not the panicked, terrified silence from before, but the kind of stunned quiet you get when your entire understanding of reality just got turned upside down. The Altarian representative's crystalline face had stopped crackling with fear cracks and was now showing the rainbow patterns that indicated complete bewilderment. The massive Corvin War admiral was leaning back in his seat, staring at the communication display like it had just told him that gravity worked backwards. The Zephyrian ambassador stopped making those nervous clicking sounds and instead made one long, drawn-out whistle that roughly translated to, "What the hell just happened?" Even the blob-like gelatins had reformed themselves into perfect spheres, which was apparently what they did when they were too shocked to maintain their usual amorphous shapes. But the real proof came when the rescue ships finally arrived at Kepler Station. The Council had immediately dispatched their fastest vessels, expecting to find nothing but wreckage and expanding shadow zones. Instead, they found something that none of them had prepared for. The human crew just casually helping repair station systems and sharing coffee with the traumatized alien miners. The scene was so normal, it was almost surreal. Engineer Jake Morrison was up to his elbows in some kind of power coupling, explaining to a group of fascinated Nexury tech specialists exactly how he'd rigged mining charges to work as anti-wraith weapons. The trick is getting the particle density just right, he was saying, like he was discussing a recipe for soup instead of a method for destroying reality-bending shadow creatures. Medical Officer Lisa Park was treating wounded station personnel like she dealt with shadow creature attacks every Tuesday. The rescue teams watched in amazement as she calmly bandaged injuries and administered treatment to aliens whose biology she'd probably never studied before, improvising medical techniques on the spot with the same matter-of-fact attitude the crew had shown during the battle. Navigator Beth Clark had somehow managed to get the station's ancient coffee maker working and was serving hot drinks to anyone who wanted them. The traumatized miners, who had been huddled in terror for days expecting to be consumed by shadow creatures, were actually laughing at stories the humans were telling about similar situations back on Earth. Yeah, this reminded me of the time we had a tornado outbreak back in Kansas. Pilot Jessica Wong was saying to a group of wide-eyed alien survivors, "Wind strong enough to pick up houses and throw them around like toys. We just went down to the basement and waited it out, then came up and started cleaning up the mess." The rescue team leaders tried to conduct proper debriefings to understand exactly what had happened and how the humans had succeeded where 3 entire fleets had failed. But getting a straight answer was like trying to nail jelly to a wall. The humans kept downplaying what they'd done, treating it like it was no big deal. Communications Officer Ryan Brooks shrugged when asked about their tactics. "We just tried different things until something worked. That's how you solve problems, right? You keep trying until you figure it out." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, completely unaware that he'd just described an approach to problem solving that was apparently unique in galactic civilization. The council members who had spent cycles preparing for the end of galactic civilization suddenly realized something important. These humans they dismissed as primitive newcomers from a death world had just solved their impossible problem in less than a day, not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but by looking at something that terrified the entire galaxy and asking, how do we make this work? The realization spread through the galactic community like wildfire. Emergency sessions were called, not to plan evacuations this time, but to discuss what this meant for everyone. Species that had been around for millions of years, civilizations that had mastered technologies beyond human comprehension, were suddenly asking themselves a very uncomfortable question. If these primitive Deathworlders could solve a problem that stumped everyone else, what did that say about the rest of them? The answer was becoming increasingly clear as reports came in from other sectors. Humans weren't just good at dealing with wraiths. They were good at dealing with any kind of crisis that required creative thinking and adaptability. Pirates that had been terrorizing trade routes for decades suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered by human merchant crews who treated space piracy like just another obstacle to work around. Scientific problems that had puzzled researchers for centuries were being solved by human graduate students who approached them from completely different angles. Turns out, having neighbors who evolved on a planet constantly trying to kill them wasn't the liability everyone thought it was. It was a galaxy's greatest asset, a species that didn't know the meaning of impossible. Because on Earth, impossible was just another word for Tuesday. A species that had spent millions of years learning that every problem had a solution. You just had to be creative enough to find it. And as the galaxy slowly came to terms with this new reality, one thing became absolutely clear. The humans weren't just another member species in the galactic community. They were the problem solvers, the ones you called when everything else had failed and you needed someone crazy enough to find a way forward.